My name is Hiba, and I'm actually here from Michigan. I am emceeing for the second year in the Muslim Mental Health Conference, so it's great to see a lot of familiar faces and new faces as well. I'm just going to go ahead and get started with introducing our speakers. I'll introduce all three at once, and then they can go ahead and however they feel is most appropriate to structure, we'll go from there. So our first speaker is Dr. Rukhsana Chaudhry, but she goes by Mona. She completed her postgrad training at Harvard University's Global Mental Health Program, specializing specifically in trauma and recovery. And for the past 5 years, she served as Director of Mental Health Programming for American Muslim health professionals. Next up, we have Ishaq Pathan, and he's a youth manager of Islamic Networks Group. He's done a lot of great work with speaking and kind of mentoring. I'm sure his session on the solution to building resilience among the middle Muslim school-aged children will be great. He's done a lot of youth training seminars, spoken to thousands of students relating the topics of Islam and Muslims, and he's a member of Interfaith Youth Corps Alumni Network. Last but not least, we have Dr. Debbie Almontaser, and excuse me while I flip through her bio. And all of these are further in detail in the pamphlet, so if you'd like to know a little bit more about these speakers, please feel free to read ahead. She is a community leader, and she's the founder and CEO of Bridging Cultures Group Incorporated. She was also the founding and former principal of Khalid Gibran International Academy in Brooklyn, New York. So as you can see, we have a lot of influential and very well-established people here. Please take advantage, listen to what they have to say, and then meet with them after. We will be having about 5 minutes of questions just to maximize the time that they can speak. So without that, I'll go ahead and let them get started.
Good afternoon, everyone, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for your introduction, Heba. So today I am going to be talking about the status of religious-based anti-bullying interventions and programming in the U.S. Part of the work that I will be talking about is the Anti-Bullying Interfaith Summit, the first of its kind actually nationally that we put on as the American Muslim Health Professionals in partnership with ING and Seek Kid to Kid. This took place in December of this past year, and we're really proud of the work that came out of that, and it will be drafted into a white paper, which is currently being revised and edited. So first I'd like to talk about prevalence, about anti-bullying interventions and anti-bullying issues, and specifically to people who are targeted, of course. And one of the things that importantly came out of our summit was the discrepancy between statistics and, of course, reporting. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that. The U.S. Department of Education under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does not require schools to record the target's religion, though it may be inaccurately inferred based on ancestry or ethnic origin. I don't have to tell you how problematic this is, I think, in this room, but in terms of understanding bullying and targets of bullying that have to do with ethnic or racial issues or identity or stigma associated with that, this could pose a huge problem. So we have excellent people and researchers that have went out and found information from different populations to better this statistic. So we have ISP statistic, which I was really encouraged by Congressman Dingell's mentioning of 42% of American Muslim parents reporting via ISPU, who we are in partnership for our white paper, via their survey having conducted across the United States. And so 60% of parents reported that discrimination was occurring to them or their families, and they reported 42% of their kids were dealing with bullying incidents in their communities. So that's from a think tank that focuses on a specific population, as in the American Muslim population. So you can see how discrepant some of this already becomes. Some other things that I'd like to point out before we move on is that in 2011, overall, the Department of Justice had reported and in their findings that there was a 28% statistic of people that experienced bullying overall. But as others in this room might know, CARE found in their report about California in the past year that, you know, that number is actually 53% for American Muslim students. So 20% more students in California than the national statistic. It's so significant when it comes to a specific community. So the American Muslim health professionals have a vested interest in understanding this, but we decided that we had a vested interest in understanding the amount of discrimination, bullying, and prevalence of perpetuation of stereotypes and prejudice as it belongs to, is connected to other communities, the Jewish faith community, and of course the Hindu and Sikh communities. From there, we decided to work on our summit. But some of the other things that we can talk about in terms of prevalence rates and why that might be so underreported is inadequate reporting mechanisms. As you see, the definition has not even been revised since 1964 to include some kind of identity aspect or why a person would be targeted. There's an incredible lack of training in schools on what constitutes bullying. So one of the pieces that's important to understand is that bullying is really, it's something that a lot of people don't really understand that occurs in their schools. They might see one incident and they might not see that that incident is continuing, or there's a fear of a continuation, and that intimidation alone can constitute bullying. So there's a lot of different definitions to it. There's also a failure to report due, like I said, fear of retaliation or belief that adults will do nothing in terms of addressing the incident. So this is what we set out to achieve in the first ever National Interfaith Bullying Summit that we put together in December. The idea was that we would try to revise some of these programs by bringing together educators, advocates, teachers, and counselors who work directly with these students. And it would come from different communities. It wouldn't just be representing the American Muslim community. So the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding was brought on as our research partner. And a lot of themes came out of our plenary sessions and the smaller breakout sessions. Some of the themes included the testimonies of those affected by bullying and its impact on mental health. We had heard from several bullying victims from various communities, the Sikh, Muslim, and Hindu community representatives in our breakout sessions in terms of the experiences they had in their school settings. Combating prejudice, hostility, marginalization, and seeking equity was another theme. Overcoming exclusion and social isolation, empowerment, advocacy, and interfaith engagement, teacher and administrator professional development, the need for cultural competency and religious literacy training, emphasizing social and emotional character development in schools, and navigating social media and digital citizenship, as well as, of course, our identification of toolkits and videos and infographics and things like that that have to do with bullying, anti-bullying issues. So if we want to identify some of those key issues that are involved in the current practices and interventions in schools, from the summit, the gathering of these presenters, and from the data from the breakout sessions, we found the legal perspective varies a lot from state to state. One of the strongest examples is the New Jersey Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights, which does include the phrase harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And we found that each state, really needs to increase their ability to see that bullying is not a particular type of interaction, that there's repeated interactions, and that that has an effect on the mental health of the individual. We also said that the most vulnerable groups importantly should be noted, as they do in New Jersey, which is the racial, religious, sexual minorities, etc., in its conception of harassment, intimidation, and prevalence rates that we're seeing. In a study conducted, as I said, by the ISPU think tank, on a national representative sample of American families, we saw that 42% of Muslims, 23% of Jews, and 6% of Catholics reported that at least one child had been bullied. I also want to mention quickly the Southern Poverty Law Center statistics as well from their Teaching Tolerance Project. They surveyed over 10,000 teachers, counselors, and advocates about the impact of the 2016 election on school environments K through 12. And the survey indicated that the results of the election are having a profound negative impact of schools and students. 90% of educators reported school climate had been negatively affected. A full 80% described heightened anxiety and concern on the part of the students. And on the upswing was verbal harassment, use of slurs, derogatory language, disturbing incidents involving swastikas and Nazi salutes and Confederate flags. The most afflicted from these issues that the teachers themselves reported were marginalized students, students of color, students of racial and religious religiously diverse backgrounds, as well as LGBT students. So now we found, through the summit, we were coming together, partially knowing this as a part of our unconscious, I think, but also seeing that we do need to join with the other communities who are facing this level of experience and what is affecting their mental health. So, and we want to also take note that one of the issues is that part of bullying is that's not so clear is that social exclusion is one of the other methods that bullying really gets perpetuated in a school. Okay. So some of the things we learned from the testimonies were that a lot of people who shared their stories talked about their anxiety and the depression that might have followed. These are the victims that we heard from at the summit. And one of the particular victims that we heard from had talked about his being bullied through, as being cyberbullied. And one of his experiences after continuously experiencing it was really having suicidal thinking. And, there is a connection to one's identity and the importance of understanding when that gets questioned, that can in fact, impact one's mental health. A recent study I also want to mention is by the University of Delaware, which was recently published, and they talked about this effect of stigma-based bullying occurring in schools and what type of impact on mental health that has. They did find equivalent factors and correlates of anxiety and depression. And so they're finding that the more programs that are developed that have to do with stigma-based bullying, where identity is involved as one of the targets for bullying, the reduction of overall bullying occurs in school. They found that, and they also found that if you implement some of these programs, the community environment overall is impacted positively. So with regards to that, I did talk about the anxiety and the depression that comes with it, but also the compromised peer relationships, academic disengagement, and risk of suicidal thoughts and suicide. So one of the important approaches we found to adopt for a lot of schools through coming together and working together in these groups was that infusing anti-bullying messages and strategies on the systemic level is really critical. We cannot approach bullying as separate incidents, and we can't separate out bullying as an issue. And part of it is that you might have the one event that focuses on the issue, but it's not an ongoing school climate change. And every school representative that we had found their success, was most when they increased the amount of people that participated in year-round character building and positive school climate interventions. So, and they also talked about higher education being left out often. That's the college university setting. So some of the challenges that we also found was that issues in curriculum and religious literacy. So when we have curriculum being presented in schools that have to do with K through 12, and one individual does not see themselves represented in that curriculum, that really sends a message from the school itself to the student. And we had one of the directors of the DC citywide bullying prevention program talking about how critical this was to the program she developed. So, the question is, do you see yourself reflected in the curriculum? And from there to have a thoughtful conversation about what impact that might have, and how to improve that curriculum so that your background, whether it's your faith or your experience of culture, is in the curriculum. Now, you will get pushback. I know, for instance, in San Diego, they've tried to put together an anti-bullying intervention program from CARE, and it is being thought of as perpetuating religious philosophy, and you can get it, they're experiencing a legal issue. So this will happen, but at the same time, we heard from excellent presenters in Chicago, which I'll just mention, John Carmadella and Anisha Patel, who have implemented religious literacy as part of their entire teacher training. So they go from beginning to end of learning various faiths, Buddhists, Muslims, Jewish faith, Baptist faith, all the different denominations, and they talk about what is particularly salient to that community. So it is an education in itself for the teachers. And one of the things they said, and it's important to note, is that one of the important factors for teachers, rather, is they need to have an education on religious background in order to combat their own stereotypes and prejudice that they might perpetuate. So, you might question someone's stereotypes and ask them to check them, but at the same time, without having any education or knowledge, they're really not going to get into a place of being able to do that. So one of the other pieces here to solutions is that the summit presenters who discussed experiences of bullying seen in their own settings and via student interaction noted that the inaction of adults in schools who were aware of the bullying was perhaps the most hurtful part. So this is one of the important factors in how we combat bullying, and that is that adults who not just stand by, but may perpetuate that and talk about issues in the political climate in inaccurate ways or identify. And we know that as part of perhaps our community, we've heard incidents time and again where this has happened. And that sets up the foundation for bullying to occur from the students. That comes from role models and the school setting. When bullying occurs, it's critical to restore the target's confidence that school is a safe place, as it is done in restorative justice techniques. So oftentimes the reporting is the most important part of bullying incidents that occur in a school, and being able to understand what's happening, but very few times is the victim and their mental health and well-being thereafter being discussed. And so, it's very much about administrative issues that come up, but not really being able to understand what's going on with this person who is perpetuating these ideas and what's going on with the bullying victim. How can we understand their mental health experiences and what's driven them to this point? So one of the other pieces is that when schools focus on causes for the bully to abuse others, they can become a mechanism of support for both the person who's experienced the bullying and the person who is the perpetrating the bullying. So other solutions and challenges have to do with students wanting to be able to anonymously report that they've been a victim of bullying. This issue of retaliation prevents students particularly from reporting any type of bullying incident. So, this really needs to be taken care of in terms of the culture and developing characteristics in students where they go from just watching and becoming upstanders instead, and you're no longer a bystander, but there is a sense that they can become upstanders in their community and in their school, but that really does come from a school climate. Building parent involvement and partnerships is also critical, and this particularly becomes salient when it has to do with social media and cyberbullying. So a lot of parents come away from an understanding of what's going on with bullying in school, not knowing what's going on on the internet and their social media accounts. So one of the things that I think was really important is by Maria Mozaffar, who runs a blog for students and people understanding their own identity and their own politics as well, is that she talked about conflict resolution. So their focus is on how to increase community engagement to have young people become a part of civic engagement philosophy and part of their idea of how they become part of society. So the conclusions of our summit and our white paper soon to be published is that progress really does need to be made in improving our definition, our measurement and reporting of our of victimization. but without also recording the racial, ethnic, and religious background of these targets of bullying, we will continue to underestimate the experience. So we really, I think, as a summit, decided that we would make our next objective advocating for not just policy change, because that can be really difficult at times, but also an influence whether it's at the corporate level or different experiences of media that have to do with how this does not get reported. So there has to be some connection to how we do that. In order to understand the form of bias-based bullying, we can no longer conflate all of this. And ultimately, I think, the positive school climate piece is going to be one of the things that we see coming out of a lot of anti-bullying intervention programs, something that I recently saw as I was at a social media summit myself representing AMP, and one of the pieces that they're really working on is the social emotional development. So as far as we can get our voices heard, I think that will be probably the next phase that we can really work on together as a partnership as well. So thank you so much.
Should we just like magically pop it up?
Back. How do I go back? There we go. Okay. So, Assalamualaikum. My name is Ishaq. Pathan. I work at the Islamic Networks Group. I'm the youth manager there, and I'll talk a little bit about all of that in a second. So, my presentation is on one solution to the issue of building resilience in Muslim school-age children. So, an overview of what I'll talk about is a brief thing about ING. I'm not going to talk about the problem of bullying because we've already talked about that. I'll go into some solutions and then what we've come up with. So ING is an organization founded in the Bay Area in 1993 in response to the first Persian Gulf War, recognizing the lack of education about Islam and Muslims primarily in schools, but also in community settings. So now we do this work around the country with 20 affiliates, and including in one area in Canada. So bullying of Muslim students is very prevalent. We don't need to talk about the statistics. Solutions. Okay, so one major thing that we need to look at is with religious identity-based bullying, a lot of the issue with that is a lack of education. So, and face-to-face like interaction and positive views. So when you look at certain studies, you find that Americans who interact with Muslims have more positive views than Muslims. When you look at the idea of the impacts of 10-minute conversations that students at Stanford who were transgender had 10-minute conversations, then the result of that were improved attitudes of transgender people overall. And then lastly, based on our own impact reports after our presentations, the percentage of those believing that Muslims are violent falls to like 50% and so on. Another major thing to look at with children is the effectiveness of empowering the target. So resilience is really important in developing Muslim children's identity. And so how do we do that? So one thing, how do we define resilience and what are we looking at? For us, resilience is about Muslim people growing up in this country, understanding how their people, how their religion is viewing the current event issues that are happening today. It's also about them not feeling otherized by the population, and just being able to understand and know and contribute to the growing Islamophobia that they're facing, or contribute to solving the growing Islamophobia. So we've developed the ING Youth Program, which works with Muslim students in middle and high school to help address their school environments. So it starts with educating them about various things that they should know, and then training them and certifying them to take this information and spread it to their classmates and peers. So the bulk of it is through workshops and trainings and so on. So we do these workshops where, first of all, these students are given a space where they can talk about their experiences and openly share about them. And this is a great opportunity for them to realize that their own bullying, especially relating to their religious identity, is not isolated, but rather is rather shared by other people in that room. Additionally, we look at their student rights, and then we look at bullying scenarios. So I think in order to be resilient, you really need to be preventative, and dealing with bullying after the fact is a lot less effective than dealing with it beforehand. So whether or not they're actually looking at certain situations, we pose to them certain scenarios that they have to talk through amongst each other and figure out how they're going to respond. So one example is looking at the idea of this overarching thing that Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs are all kind of the same. So if a student asks a Muslim student, hey, don't you worship one of those weird elephant gods? And the Muslim student responds, no, of course we don't, we're thinking of Hindus, I don't know what's up with that. Now these students have to think about what about the situation is good and bad, and how would they respond in that situation. What's really good about it, I think this is why I like it, is because it allows them to also develop a sense of empathy and understanding for other groups of people that also might deal with religious-based bullying, and to teach them not to just turn things around and spin it on other people, which is what this student does here. It positions the Muslim student as both a victim and as a contributor to bullying. And so we need to recognize that Muslim students are victims, but they also can perpetuate bullying as well. So trying to help them understand, see this with concrete scenarios is one thing that we do. Another thing in these workshops is that it's not the facilitator telling them this is what you need to do, but it's rather them talking through scenarios and having them discuss and come up with their own solutions. And that is, in a way, allowing them, giving that agency for them to move forward with something that's practical, rather than something that is hypothetical from an adult. In addition to these workshops, we do speakers trainings where they get exposure and practice to ING youth resources, which I'll talk about in a second. So the fact of the matter is that a lot of these students don't know about the diversity of perspectives within their own religion, and have very narrow-minded perspectives on things. There was a presentation in the last one which was on Islamic psychology, and the definition was what is Islamic, what is Islam, and what is psychology. And then one thing she said was that people would always use the phrase in Islam. And this is a common thing, well, again, with our content, we're trying to teach them that there's a strong diversity. So the first things are answers to frequently asked questions that are available online at ing.org/youthfaq. And then it's 50 plus questions that are related to current event topics. So one question is, if Islam is considered a religion of peace, why is there so much conflict among Muslims? And having them, and what is Sharia, having them be able to know this information for themselves is really important for their own identity, and then being able to articulate that to other people. What we also look at is the hidden assumptions in certain questions, like the first one. So the hidden assumption there is conflict among Muslims, and having them be able to identify that and develop the mental complexity to then challenge that conception as a whole, and then answer the actual question. Additionally, we have youth presentations, and these are a variety. There are 4 topics. One is kind of Islam 101, one is the history of Muslims in America, one is Muslim women beyond the stereotypes, and one is Muslim contributions to civilization. And I think what's really important is that these are not only good resources for Muslim schools, Muslims in public schools and private schools, but also in Islamic schools, because it's teaching them a lot of information that they might not know. For example, Muslim contributions to civilization is allowing them to reclaim that history of Muslims that has been erased in a lot of ways in mainstream society. A history of American Muslims is primarily about the foundations of this country, which started with the enslaved Africans, and seeing how they have paved the way for what these Muslims have today through various movements throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. And then Muslim women beyond the stereotypes is not just saying Islam is this or that, but it's looking at here is the practice of Muslims around, Muslim women especially around the world, and there's a wide diversity on that, and we need to examine all the factors that are playing a role into their treatment, and then identifying various Muslim role models in a bunch of different fields. So on a whole, we kind of teach them, especially that these presentations are ways that they can educate themselves, but then also educate others, because the fact of the matter is that sense of agency and power. We've done workshops in 8 states and 14 locations. We've trained over 250 students, and what's, obviously not all students want to speak up in front of people, and so the way we kind of work on it is they can interact with the program at their own leisure. So the training just involves them knowing the information for themselves, and then they can get certified, which allows them to engage the material and get tested on it. And we do these drill sessions where they have to present in front of a facilitator, but they also have to respond to questions by that facilitator. You know, why are you not assimilating? Like really challenging things that they shouldn't have to deal with, but unfortunately they are, and so how can we prepare them to that climate? There's some videos of ING speakers. As you can see in the picture on the left, she's all the way in the front, and that's a lot of people. So, I mean, it's great that she was really able to get up in front of these other people, and the other one on the right is speaking to students in her classroom. So, both of the videos, I'm not going to show them for the sake of time, but are them talking about their Muslim identity especially, and like the pride that it gives them. And they're articulating that to all of these people, which again, gives them that better sense of that confidence that they need. In terms of reflections that they've given after presentations, you can read them yourself, but one thing that I want to highlight is that all of them focus on not only like what they've been given, but also their own contribution. So saying, I'm glad to be able to teach others, or it has given me opportunities to represent Muslims and build up my speaking skills. So it's kind of allowing, they're able to showcase their skills, and that's giving them a sense of confidence, especially with how they're reflecting on the experience that they've gone through. So I'm going to end there. My contact information is here, and I'll open up for questions at the end. Thank you.
Did everybody get the CME sign-up sheet? Am I the last one? Or do you guys need it over there?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Dr. Debbie Almontaser. I am here from New York City. I'm really honored and delighted to be here today to actually share with you my research. So you have the opportunity to actually hear first from Rukhsana about the study that they did in terms of bullying of Muslim youth across the United States. And then you actually had a chance to hear about ways to combat bullying. And the topic that I'm going to be sharing with you now is really focusing on adults. And a bunch of unique adults that nobody's really studied yet, and that is actually Muslim principals working in public education. Now what we know is that there are plenty of Islamic school principals, and there's been plenty of studies done on them, but this is actually the first time that Muslim principals in public education have been studied. So I want to start off with a disclaimer. What led me to this topic actually was my own personal experience as the founding principal of the Khalil Gibran International Academy in New York City, the first Arabic dual language public school in the United States. And there's plenty for you to read about that and my journey. I have a wiki page that you can actually learn about everything that happened with the school. You can read the New York Times to learn about my experience. But my experience informed me to look and see if there were other Muslim principals who had in any way experienced what I had experienced. So the study focused on examining the lived experiences of American principals serving in public education post 9/11 to determine whether the global events, political discourse, and media coverage of Islam and Muslims has affected their leadership and spirituality. Now, what do I mean by the global events? I mean all the terrorist acts that are happening, whether they're in the U.S., Europe, Middle East. Important to know that context, right? And we're talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and any of these fringe groups that are constantly doing things in the name of Islam. Political discourse. Political discourse is what we hear and see every day on Fox 5, on CNN, all of the stuff that is continually being said about Islam and Muslims in America. And then lastly, the media coverage. I need not say much about what media coverage means for us as Muslims and the way that we are portrayed in the media. So basically the research, the purpose of it was to basically see, what are their experiences, and to help determine the adversities, particularly through the decisions about educational policy and district leadership, specifically focusing on school district superintendents, university departments where education is something that is crucial and critical to create the pipeline for administrators, specifically principals. So really to inform them in terms of what is it that they need to do to actually have more Muslim principals. So these are the research questions that I focused on. I'll give you just a second to review them. They drove the study for me in terms of really being able to ask the questions, the pointing questions that I needed to in terms of being able to really dig deep. So what came of these research questions was an additional 10 questions that basically focused on practice, on how they perceive themselves, how their communities perceive them, and what was it like for them to live as Muslim principals. So the theoretical framework that I focused on is actually political spectacle. How many people here know political spectacle and Murray Edelman's theory of political spectacle? Anybody here? Just curious. Okay, one person. Okay, awesome. I have to tell you, when I first learned about it, I was like, there is such a thing called political spectacle? I thought it was just what we see every day on TV. Little did I know that a theory actually developed. So a little bit about the theory. It is a theory that actually was based on the works of Nelson Goodman, Michael Foucault, Jacques Derrida, their theoretical framework, as well as Murray Edelman basically, coming to the conclusion that he needed to actually take all of this and develop his own theory. So the theory of political spectacle identifies how social situations, leaders, and enemies are constructed to create political spectacle. Political spectacle is a construction to misinform the public, to legitimize political action and reify inequalities. Within each spectacle, an issue or a policy is purposely misrepresented to the advantage of one party over the other, whether it be politicians, researchers, the mass media, or the corporate world. In this case, political spectacle is the stage within which Muslim principals lead and live their lives in public school systems. So before I started the research, I had to look to see if there was any research done on Muslim principles. As I alluded to earlier, what I found, which was very interesting, was there was tons of literature on Muslim principals serving in Islamic schools. I found 2 other studies, but they were not specifically focusing on Muslim principals, but they were on the topics of school leadership, which they had Muslim leaders within them. And so that was very interesting, but their identities were not really up for study. It was just simply an indication that they were Muslim, but they were studied in another context. So what I had to do was basically look to see who else in this particular area of leadership and spirituality that had been studied. So because this was a study that I specifically focused on leadership, I needed to focus on effective school leadership and looking at that body of work. Leadership and spirituality, which interestingly enough, there is tons of literature on spirituality, specifically within the African American community, and that research has been done. And then I had to look at Islam and Muslims in America. I alluded to Muslims in Islamic education. But the 2 communities that I had to then look to see that were somewhat similar to our community were actually first came to the United States and what was life for them and what their plight was in public education. It was very, very interesting. But basically, I used their experience in the early 19th century to be able to build a body of literature to look at our community. And so what I looked at specifically within these two communities is the role that education played for them and their participation as principals. So the methodology that I used was a snowball effect. This was a phenomenological study. And what I did was I reached far and wide to try to find Muslim principals. It was the most difficult thing for me to be able to do. It took me about 6 months to find people. I contacted national Islamic organizations and asked them to post the information for me. I contacted people, and then finally I was able to connect to 1 or 2 people who knew people. In total, I was able to actually find 20 principals across the United States. And sadly, I was only able to get 14 people to participate. So what we did was first I provided them a pre-interview, a demographics questionnaire via email. Then I did a face-to-face interview with them, and then a follow-up interview via Skype. The interviews took place between August 15th and March 2016. And I have to tell you, that was like the ripest time of Islamophobia. That was a time where, you know, the presidential race was going on, all the rhetoric from Trump and what have you. So it was very, very interesting to see what had come up. Now, the demographics of the participants is quite interesting. I can't see the slide from here. So there were 8 females, and then there were 6 males. That probably have to look this way. Okay, and they were actually a variety. I had some who were high school principals, elementary school, middle school, and then K to 12. In addition to that, looking at the demographics, the majority were actually African American, which was really also very interesting. There were 3 that were US born. I had 3 who were Middle Eastern, someone who was born in Tanzania but was South Asian background, and 1 person from Pakistan. And the study basically took place mostly in the Eastern region, Midwest, and the Southern West. And so it was really fascinating in terms of trying to do this study in New York City. I was only able to engage, of the 4 that were there, 2 who wanted to participate. The other 2 basically said to me, do not ever call me again. I'm not interested in anything that you are working on. I wish you the best of luck. Please don't ever call me again. I will leave that for you to find out why they were so nervous to talk to me. It was because of my own personal experience as a public education principal and what I had experienced. And so they felt that their affiliation with me would in some way actually endanger their leadership. Sadly, so they were not a part of the study. So I want to go now through the findings. There were 6 emerging themes that came out: the political climate, role of the media, inferior and foreign. And I'll go through each and every one of them just to give you an understanding of what this, how this translated. Throughout the interviews, any mention of political climate was overwhelmingly focused on 9/11 and the days that followed to the time of the interview. Every participant offered reflections on the political climate, which they believe plays a strong role in the way Islam and Muslims are portrayed and perceived. Participants also acknowledged that the political climate had an effect on their leadership and how they interacted with others. The role of the media. Every participant in the study believed that the media coverage hypothesized political spectacle created by forces such as Al-Qaeda, Islamophobia industry, politicians, ISIS, the GOP presidential candidates regarding the way Islam and Muslims are portrayed and perceived. The term media encapsulates a broad range of mediums, including print, online papers, blogs, social media, such as Facebook and Twitter, and radio and cable networks such as CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, PBS, and Fox News. In a follow-up question that requested clarification from all the participants in regard to understanding of the term media, the majority stated that they were referring to cable networks such as CNN, ABC, and Fox. In total, the 14 participants uttered the word media during the interviews 143 times. The media certainly has a psychological impact on American Muslims who consistently view demeaning images of themselves in the media. The third finding, inferior and foreign. Political spectacle has caused the perception that Muslims are inferior and foreign. Participants shared their struggle with being made to feel inferior and foreign, both professionally and personally. All 14 participants conveyed that Muslims feel that they have to work twice as hard to show that they are capable of their positions as principals. Of these 6 felt they have to prove themselves 3 times as hard because they were African American and Muslim. And 6 of the female participants who are visibly Muslim via the veil or hijab expressed similar sentiments as it resulted to dual identity, African American and Muslim. With the backdrop of political spectacle, some participants also experienced prejudice and blatant discrimination. The next finding, which is unconscious fear, all participants experienced fear, whether conscious or perhaps unconscious. These fears range from losing their jobs to being targeted by parents, the school community, elected officials, or the media. The attitudes and behaviors of others towards Muslim school leaders has made American Muslim leaders feel self-conscious and guarded about what they say and do for fear of being scrutinized and labeled as extremist. In this regard, many participants acknowledged a need to maintain political correctness. Unconscious fear and the need to maintain political correctness were consistent themes throughout all the participants' interviews, irrespective of conflicts that they may have experienced as principals. Participants also believed that consequences for their actions would be much harsher because